Welcome back, Warriors, to the worst fighting game. The show where I try to find the worst fighting. You know how this works. I played Criticom, and it was really bad, and later on I played Expect No Mercy, which was even worse somehow. But all along, there's been another fighting fiasco, which is probably even more well known than both of those aforementioned embarrassments, as it was constantly advertised in game magazines back in the day that I, ashamedly enough, was jealous over because I didn't own a PlayStation 1 back then. Oof, but why am I tackling it today? Well, you know, there's been far too much goodwill about the world of Dungeons & Dragons recently, so I felt it was high time to balance that out with the unmitigated disaster that was Iron and Blood Warriors of Ravenloft. This was an attempt to expand the world-famous fantasy franchise into the red-hot genre of the fighting game, and is probably also the reason why it was never attempted again. But will it be able to cast a devastating fireball upon Expect No Mercy and reduce its legacy to ashes? Well, we won't know for sure until we get it in the ring. The history of this turd, we're starting off hot, is actually pretty interesting. TSR, the original owners of D&D, had licensed out the property to SSI for a bunch of different computer games throughout the 80s. But once the 90s hit in all its neon glory, Dungeons & Dragons was eventually able to distance itself from the early accusations of it being a satanic communication tool.
This is the teaching of the occult. This is exactly what we were introduced into in Star Wars and E.T.,
thus allowing them to expand their reach even further into other mediums like video games. Not only was mainline stuff getting adapted, but other campaign scenarios / pocket dimensions like Mystara were getting licensed out as well. So TSR granted permission for a fighting game based on the Ravenloft universe to Acclaim and plucky young Take-Two Interactive, who developed Iron and Blood for the PlayStation, DOS, and it was a shit show the end. Oh wait, that's actually not very interesting at all. Well, fortunately, it ain't the full story. Take-Two, which is now a giant, unfeeling video game conglomerate, came from humble beginnings, developing a select few different titles throughout the 90s, mostly for the PC, before transitioning into their final form as a publisher. Their only console game was Iron and Blood, or should I say Iron Blood, because originally the game was scheduled to come out on Panasonic's ill-fated and non-existent M2 hardware, but wasn't based on D&D at all. But the young developers assigned to the project, who were all mostly fresh out of college by the way, were massive D&D fans and wanted to make a dark fantasy fighting game, but since the idea of actually getting the D&D license was ludicrous, they crafted their own, fairly generic universe instead and just dubbed it Iron Blood. Once the M2 was completely obliterated off the face of the earth, Iron Blood was smartly moved over to the PlayStation, where it was unfortunately given a shoestring budget and strict development deadline, and again, for many on the team, this was their first professional project. They attempted to use motion capture to bring the game's combat to life,
which was the style at the time,
hiring performers from the Society for Creative Anachronism to act out the fights. Seriously though, their dedication to their craft is admirable. Anyway, to record the actors' movements, Take-Two used the very early motion capture device known as Flock of Birds, which I last talked about in my KI retrospective, and similar to Rare's experience with the technology, it was a load of garbage that kept breaking down every 5 minutes. So the team were then forced to throw out the very little data they were able to record, and had to go back to animating the characters by hand, which many of them had very little experience with, which, shows in the final product. Then, just a handful of months from the game going gold, Acclaim started to have doubts that Iron Blood was going to light store shelves on fire, unless it had some type of hook. So they contacted TSR and made a bid for a D&D license, and were actually granted Ravenloft, which, you might think would have elicited whoops of hype from the team, but it was quite the opposite. Acclaim apparently didn't give them extra development time, so all they could do was tweak a few names, add a few references, and slap an unfinished Strahd in there at the 11th hour. You know, this guy. While the team behind Iron Blood were indeed all big dorks, I mean D&D fans, suddenly being told, oh, you know that thing you're making as an homage to the thing you really like? Well, now that thing is the official thing, and you're not getting any extra time or money to make that thing. Damn, that's pretty sketchy of Acclaim, I have to say. Taking the earliest opportunity to pull the wool over everyone's eyes at the last second just to sell a product? Morally dubious? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Which is why I'm proud to announce the Matt McFighter plushie campaign, which is being run by my friends over at Makeship. If 200 of you hit the link in the description below and slap a pre-order down for this purple and incredibly handsome skeleton warrior within the next 21 days, you'll lock in your order and he'll ship to your door, even internationally, in the next few months. But if it doesn't meet that pre-order number, then no harm, no foul. You won't be charged and he'll be cast into the pit of failed mascots. But I mean, come on, how can you say no to that bony face? You can't! So head on over to the Makeship campaign page and buy the Matt McFighter, or go to hell! So yeah, Acclaim were slimy scumbags for doing that.
You weak, pathetic fool.
But their gamble worked. Despite getting very, very negative reviews across the board, the newly named Iron and Blood Warriors of Ravenloft reportedly sold over 150,000 copies, making a tidy profit for Take-Two and helping to catapult them into the giant soulless machine they now are today. So with that very unhinged thought playing through your minds that this stinker had a small part in popularizing Grand Theft Auto, it's time for us to discuss the... Like most PlayStation games released in this era, Iron and Blood starts off with a grainy CGI intro. It's not bad or anything, but it's not good or anything either. Things kick off, or kick down even further, with some really bare-bones menus and even more dire loading screens. Can't you have a spinning magic orb or missile or a dice or something? There is some improvement when you get to the character select screen though. I mean, damn, look at all these wizards and/or warriors. They're all separated into two distinct sides, essentially faces and heels. If they have frowns or fangs, then they're most likely the latter. If they're smiling and have bright colored clothes, then they're the former. Once you've selected one, this weird voice confirms it.
Zenobia, Nimpimply.
He's similar to the announcer from Mace the Dark Age, which I'd much rather be playing, but it's like his goofier younger brother who's just trying to sound cool.
Sasha, Red Cloud.
Mordos versus Koyasha.
And then there's the game. It's, yeah. As you can see, proportions are way off for pretty much the entire roster. What is this, Rescue Heroes Warcraft Edition? Backgrounds are one simple image and a square surface to fight on, and yeah, that's kinda it. There are the life bars though, or life flames that just, ooh, oh, I'm gonna get to you later. But overall, Ravenloft just looks pretty boring, which extends over to the audio as well. Most tracks don't make much of an impression, and for those that do, well, it's mostly a negative one.
Combination.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, every time you do a combo, even a two-hit one, you hear that every single time.
Combination.
And again, unlike KI, it's just annoying here because you'll often get situations like these.
Combination. 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 Combination.
All of this blahness is at least slightly offset by full CGI endings, but I use that pluralization loosely because there's only two. See, in campaign mode, the main single-player offering, there's only specific conclusions for the two factions, and oh man, are they ever satisfying. This means, unfortunately, that none of the individual characters have their own endings, which leads to many, i.e. all of them, being rather forgettable. Like, damn, when even Criticom shows you up with better production value, you know you fucked up. Honestly, the only credit I can really give Warriors of Ravenloft here is its substantial 16-character roster, which plumps up to an impressive 20 when you factor in the 4 unlockable bosses. The only problem with so many choices, though, is having to grapple with the... Okay, alright, okay. Iron and Blood has some of the most random, haphazard mechanics I've ever seen. It's a 4-button fighter, quick, medium, strong, and miscellaneous?
I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
High and low block, and a sidestep, which is probably the worst sidestep in the history of sidestepping. You move so fast when you do it, circling to the side of your opponent so swiftly that the camera can't keep up, so it doesn't bother. Each character only has 2 special moves and 2 to 3 canned combos, with the rest of their kits composed of random buffs that they can only acquire through winning artifacts off other opponents. Rings of healing, earth tremor, magic tridents, stuff like that. You can only keep these buffs if you don't lose all your lives though. Yes, I said lives. By default, each character has 3, and if they gain any artifacts during them and then die for good, those relics and their associated powers go with them. Now, this would be fine if it was relegated to some sort of extra RPG or roguelike mode, but no, this is how the game works everywhere. You're also required to pick a team between 3 and 6 characters, and with 3 lives as the default, fights go on and on and on until someone's finally declared the winner. I kinda get what they were maybe going for here. D&D campaigns are composed of a whole party who has to go through epic, grueling encounters before conquering the enemy, but this is a fighting game, firstly, and not an RPG, so having matches set up like this slows the whole process down to an unfathomable crawl. Oh, and I didn't forget about you, life bar flames. These are awful in letting players know exactly how much health they have left. Like, these are the worst life bars of all time. You know Battle Monsters, another game that's way better than this? It's the same sort of concept, using candles. But at least they're arranged in a bar-ish form, like, oh, this special attack does 2 candles worth of damage. I mean, that works. It's weird, but it works. But what the hell am I supposed to say about something like this? The most bizarre mechanic, though, one that to me at least is unheard of in fighting games, is the fact that some characters have advantages on certain stages while others don't. For example, if you're fighting Sasha, the werewolf, on her stage, she, and only she, can summon a relic for use in that match. Which one does she get? A buff that increases her damage by 50%. Imagine you're playing, I don't know, Street Fighter 6, and whenever you're fighting Ryu on the Japan stage, there's a chance that someone will throw him those weird confectionaries he likes, and he gets a 75% increase in his fireball speed or some shit. Of course, you'll need to find someone who will play Ravenloft with you to take advantage of this insane mechanic, because I don't recall the CPU ever doing it to me, at least as far as I can figure, but still, why would anyone ever think this would be a good thing to add? But then again, I have to ask myself, why would they also add a 100% completely useless training mode? It's essentially 1 round of combat, and if you kill the CPU dummy, you win, and are then asked if you want a rematch or to go back to the main menu. Like, what's the point? Why is there a finite amount of health? And no, there aren't any dummy options, move lists, barely anything that makes this an actual training mode. Following that is the single player campaign, which I've talked about already, and finally the head-to-head option. Why didn't they just add a simple arcade ladder where you select one character, punch Strahd in the ass, and then get your ending? I have no idea. Actually, wait, no, I do have an idea, because Acclaim didn't give them the time or money in which to do so. I can say for certain that when it comes to actual movement and feel, Iron and Blood is not slow at all. It is in fact so blisteringly fast to the point it's barely controllable. Doesn't matter if you're the big executioner guy or the hobbit dude, everyone's fast as fuck, boy, and this extends to everything. The sidestepping, the normal attacks, special moves, etc. Everything comes out at a moment's notice, or not even at a moment's notice, which leads to dumbass shit like this. Oh, yeah, that. See, the stages have these weird force fields that knock everyone down, and it doesn't matter if you're running or dodging or whatever, you always manage to hit them. And when you get knocked down in Ravenloft, you stay down. So horizontal movement is way too jacked up, whereas the ground game is way too slow. Combine this with the really sluggish camera, which never autocorrects to new positions, and suddenly this game starts to look a little bit like another bad fighting game that's way better than this. I next have to address the atrocity that occurs whenever you get turned around. You know, like in Virtua Fighter or Tekken, when your opponent slips behind you and then just takes getting hit or pressing the opposite direction and you're instantly facing your opponent again? Yeah, this is nothing like that. Every single character takes ages to turn their lumbering asses back around with an extended animation, something I don't think I've ever seen before. Like, why? Why is the game so fast in every way but these ways? Most egregious of all though, there doesn't seem to be any push block whatsoever. This is a huge reason as to why Iron and Blood feels as bad as it looks. All you need to do is find one single gangly ass normal and spam the everlasting hell out of it, because like Justin Wong has always said, the key to winning is to abuse shitty tactics over and over like crazy. I honestly think this has to be one of, if not the worst feeling game since Expect No Mercy, because it barely even feels like a dedicated fighting game and more like a bland single-player action-adventure that just so happens to have a bonus versus mode bolted on as an extra. I am struggling to think of any legit positives here, so folks, I think we just might have a contender. What sucks most of all though is that D&D, any scenario or pocket dimension, deserves and has potential to be a good fighting game. Imagine how sick it would have been if Capcom could have taken the sprites they made for their beat-em-ups and made a fighter out of it. Or hell, since Iron and Blood actually sold well, the team could have built a polished sequel from the ground up, especially with the experience they now had. But no, Take-Two execs just made that bag and then transformed into a publisher that's richer than some countries. With that said though, the unfortunate circumstances the team faced, and the fact that for many of them this was their first game, it still doesn't excuse just how poor of an experience this is, how awkward the matches are, and how miserable I was playing it. And it makes me even saltier that thanks to this, we're not going to get Karlach in a fighting game anytime soon, which is bullshit. Alright, calm down. Look, I think my emotions are running a bit high here. They're very heightened. Remember, as a kid, I actually thought this game looked awesome, mostly due to the cover art. So when I realized years later that it was in fact the exact opposite, I felt betrayed. So instead of me casting the final judgment here, let's leave it to the dice to decide. Alright, so a dark shadow looms large over Iron and Blood and then suddenly comes into view. Expect No Mercy steps out from the darkness and then casts a dreadful spell that can turn any foe into a blithering idiot by uttering a single haunting phrase.
I have seen the amateur and it is you!
If Iron and Blood is to survive and perform a counterspell, it's going to need to roll a 19 or more. Will they do it? Well, I'll be damned. Folks, friends, and fighters the world over, we have a new champion. Iron and Blood, Warriors of Ravenloft is now officially the worst fighting game. But that doesn't mean it can rest easy, because it shouldn't forget that there's many bad fighting games like it all over the world. And if you know of any contenders that could put up that good fight, let me know in the comments below or sound the battle gong over on my social media. Until then, I'll see you next time, fellow warriors, on the worst fighting game.